Morning. I'd like to join my fellow panelists in expressing my personal appreciation to Maria for organizing this symposium, and also to thank Laura Nota and Salvatore Ceresi for this stimulating conference. I want to apologize to my non-English speaking colleagues because I'm going to talk very fast so that we can get through and have Laura and also Mark speak. So I'm talking to you about assessing the external validity of the career adaptability scale. This has been conducted with two of my doctoral students in industrial organizational psychology, Catherine Ott-Holland and Marina Pierce. I'm going to skip through many of these slides because the previous speakers and many of you know about career adaptability theory, but the thing I want to emphasize is that it is, for me, a form of resilience stemming from the risk and resilience paradigm, and it is domain-specific, related to one's career activities in the work domain, as others have spoken. But also, I think importantly, interacts with the work environment in an interactive fashion, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So as others have mentioned, this began with the Berlin International Congress of Psychology, where the Career Adaptability Project was formulated, where a group of us from 14 some countries got together to develop the scale. There were international items that were developed, but each country, I think, were allowed the flexibility to add items, as Guda has mentioned in her presentation. And then finally, in the JVB special issue, we validated the four-factor model. Theoretically, I think the career adaptability is defined as a social competency which serves as a resource for individuals as they cope with current and future career tasks. The four dimensions, as have been mentioned before, so I won't go through them, but they are control, curiosity, concern, and confidence. These have been published in the special issue of Journal of Vocational Behavior with the 11 items per dimensions. Those are the reliabilities that you can see there. But in the United States, which is what I'm going to be talking about, the original validation study was done on high school students with a four-factor and represented a very good fit. What we need to do now is to test the factorial structures with other samples along the developmental continuum, moving up to university students, which is what I'm doing, to working on young adults, seasoned workers, and even people before their retirement. So I was invited to do a chapter for David Chan's book on adaptability, and this was an opportunity to reflect on the program and research on career adaptability, and we identified the program at that time some directions for future research, which included the need to move from internal validity to external validity, demonstrate the construct and predicted validity of the CAAS, and also to look at the convergent validity as well as divergent validity, as others have mentioned, and the discriminant validity as well. So this chapter, writing this chapter, actually provided an opportunity for us to conduct this study, which is to evaluate the external validity of the CAAS and also look at the convergent validity and to see how it relates to similar constructs such as general adaptability. In the United States, the military are very concerned about adaptability, as you can imagine, since many of the personnel are going to different countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, and so forth, and to look at whether, to some extent, in the future, what are the discriminant validity of career adaptability, since it's a positive construct, with things like intelligence and abilities to separate it out. So, as you know, the established measure has 4 subscales, but we used the 5 version with 5 dimensions. So I was very pleased to see previous presenters, including the cooperation dimension, which I think is very important, that the foundation with the 4 factors are good, but the cooperation, for me, it's really important to keep in there because I do research on culture and self, and I think the first 4 factors really look at the personal autonomous self, whereas cooperation and some of the others look at a much more relational self that's relevant to other parts of the world. So this will be an interesting question for exploration in terms of the 4-factor versus the additional cooperation one. So we used the 55 items, 5 version, and I'll talk more about the reason for the 5-factor at the end. So our constructs are to look at convergent validity. To what extent is the CAAS related to generalized adaptability and to coping? And then also looked at some predictive validity for specific work outcomes. In this case, we chose subjective well-being, job satisfaction, and work engagement. So I'll go through these scales very quickly. We use the general adaptability scale, which is the I-ADAPT by Ployhart and Blasey, colleagues from IO Psychology. The dimensions are listed there. We also use a coping scale. To what extent is career adaptability just a form of general coping? We use Folkman and Lazarus' ways of coping scale. The dimensions are there. So the hypothesis, the first hypothesis for our study is career adaptability should be positively related to generalized adaptability and coping for convergent validity. Then with regards to the outcomes, we looked at subjective well-being. You see the definition there, job satisfaction, and also work engagement. So our second hypothesis is that career adaptability will be positively predictive of subjective well-being, job satisfaction, and work engagement by itself. So people who are career adaptable should be expressing high subjective well-being, high job satisfaction, work engagement, and the corollary, low turnover and things like that. But at the same time, we also wanted to subject career adaptability scale to a higher level of tests, which is its incremental validity. To what extent does career adaptability predict variance above and beyond general adaptability? And hence our hypothesis 3 is that career adaptability will predict subjective well-being, job satisfaction, and work engagement above and beyond general adaptability. So here's our method. Data were collected on 514 college students with at least 6 months of work experience. Most of those work experiences are part-time, as you can imagine, so we really need to look at working samples. Participants received course credit for their time, and after reviewing the consent form, they filled out the measures. And we also had an attention check in the engagement survey. So here are the results. You see the career adaptability in terms of the means and the standard deviations, as we have outlined in terms of the instruments. Here are our questions and hypotheses. How does career adaptability relate to individual adaptability and coping, the question of convergent validity? We hope positively. How does career adaptability relate to work outcomes? We also hope that it predicts work outcomes and therefore hypothesize a positive relationship. Then in terms of incremental validity for iAdapt, and does it predict additional variance? Here are the results. The correlation between iAdapt and career adaptability is 0.526. As you can imagine, it's quite similar but not identical. We would be concerned if the correlation... Too fast for the interpreter? Okay. I'll try and slow down. Career adaptability is related to iAdapt at 0.526, which is, for us, a good measure of convergent validity. We would be concerned if it was 0.8 or higher, in which then it would be similar constructs, but it's not. So at the same time, there's also significant correlation with coping, meaning that there's some coping element to the career adaptability scale. And then finally, how does career adaptability relate to work outcomes? Okay, this is the external validity. With internal validity, we're concerned about the properties of the instrument itself, the test internally. In SEM model, that would be the measurement model. What I'm arguing for is that now we need to move the external validity outside of the instruments. What does it predict? What does it correlate with? How does it differentiate from intelligence and things like that? So just using career adaptability to look at the 3 work outcomes, we find that career adaptability is indeed significantly predictive of subjective well-being, job satisfaction, and work engagement, which is good. Interestingly enough, we also looked at general adaptability in relation to these work outcomes. In other words, career adaptability is domain-specific. It's a domain-specific form of adaptability. But if iAdapt also correlate in the same way, then we have a problem that general adaptability could predict just as well these work outcomes, but they don't. General adaptability only predicted work engagement, which once again is in support of the CAAS. Now, in moving on to incremental validity, after controlling for iAdapt, does career adaptability predict work outcomes? As you can see there in the results which I've marked for you, it does significantly predict additional variance above and beyond general adaptability for subjective well-being, for job satisfaction, but not for work engagement. As an interesting thing, you'll remember here that iAdapt is correlated with work engagement, and yet in the incremental validity, career adaptability did not predict additional variance above and beyond. So there's something about the work engagement outcome variable that we selected. So here are our results. Regarding how does career adaptability relate to individual adaptability and coping, we found positive support for the convergent validity. We also found that there's great external and predictive validity for career adaptability in that it predicted all of the outcomes we expected that we selected in terms of subjective well-being, job satisfaction, and work engagement. We did not get full support for our third hypothesis, which is the incremental validity. We found positive support for only 2 of the 3, in that except for work engagements, which iAdapt or generalized adaptability predicted. So let me move to the discussion. What we've done is extended the validity of the CAAS in the United States, moving from internal validity studies to external validity studies, which I think developmentally is a good move. Internal validity studies are concerned, as I mentioned, with internal psychometric properties of a measure, its factorial structure, internal consistency, multi-group invariance, and so forth. On the other hand, external validity studies are concerned with convergent, predictive, and construct validity, all aspects of external validity external to the measure. Our findings reveal that CAAS shows convergent validity with general adaptability and coping. To answer our first question about whether CAAS and iAdapt are related, the two are correlated. The effect size is 0.526, which is positive, moderate, and significant, as we had hypothesized. This indicates that CAAS is tapping similar underlying construct, that of adaptability, but the two do not entirely overlap. So the results indicate favorable construct and convergent validity for the CAAS. As hypothesized, the CAAS was also positively and significantly related to coping at work. So people with higher scores in career adaptability also report engaging in coping behaviors more frequently. To test our hypothesis, we used regression to predict the work outcomes from the adaptability scale. Our outcomes were subjective well-being, job satisfaction, and work engagement. And as mentioned, CAAS significantly predicted every work outcome. People with career adaptability scores, higher adaptability scores, tended to have greater subjective well-being, more job satisfaction, and stronger work engagement. On the other hand, iAdapt significantly and positively predicted only work engagement. People with higher general adaptability scores tend to have stronger work engagement, but not greater subjective well-being or nor higher job satisfaction. In addition to supporting the predictive criterion validity of the CAAS, these results also indicate the unique value of the career context and the CAAS as a domain-specific measure. Finally, we use hierarchical regression to see whether CAAS predicts work outcomes after controlling for iAdapt or generalized adaptability. Because the two variables were correlated at 0.5, we wanted to parse out whether CAAS has unique and incremental value for the prediction of work outcomes. After controlling for general adaptability, career adaptability predicted subjective well-being, job satisfaction, but not work engagement. If you recall, work engagement was significantly related to general adaptability only. To summarize, when answering our first question, we did find evidence of convergent construct-related validity. Career adaptability is significantly related to general adaptability and coping. When answering our second question, we found evidence of predictive criterion validity. Career adaptability significantly predicts work outcomes as hypothesized. For our third question, we found most but not all of what we expected. Career adaptability predicted only 2 of the 3 work outcomes. Interestingly, we tested both the 4-factor and the 5-factor model of CAAS, and the latter provided incremental validity while the former did not. So while the 4-factor has provided good internal validity across the 14 countries and has become the international version, our question is that are there additional dimensions that we need to look at, so that in today's panel, we've had 3 of us include the cooperation dimension and the whole concept of the relational self that might be more relevant in other parts of the country. So I think this inclusion of the cooperation dimension should bear further research. Limitation of the study. While most of our hypothesis was supported, our findings is restricted to a sample of college students with part-time work experiences. For our current sample, their central and most salient role, if you think of super, is that of being a student, and their employment situations are often seen as temporary or not career-related. Therefore, it will be important to cross-validate findings with working adult samples, and we think with at least 3 or more years of working experience, because we believe the first 1 to 2 years would be a transitional phase to the worker role. Other future research on external validity of CAAS would be to look at other work outcomes to determine the nomological net of theoretically related variables in order to establish the construct validity of the CAAS. In addition, we've selected a measure of general subjective well-being as one of our work outcomes. Future research could use more domain-specific measures such as career well-being scales, occupational well-being scales, and of course, longitudinal and prospective studies of the predictive validity of the CAAS would be quite valuable. Thank you very much.